Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Laura Narvaez. Just to introduce myself, I'm a partner in the data-driven urban design team. I've got Farah Kyle.
Nice. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. I'm from sustainability in the environmental engineering group.
Great. So we both of us is just going to give you a little small talk around what we do in our practice surrounding master planning urban. We're going to talk a little bit about cities, not necessarily too much about interior design, but hopefully it's of interest to many of you. Foster & Partners, we are a studio, a very multidisciplinary, very interdisciplinary studio that we... This is not working. Can you click next? Yeah. Worldwide reputation, yes. I mean, we're a very diverse studio, a very diverse company. Across our studios, very much culturally diverse. We have over 5 decades of design excellence, from buildings to infrastructure to interior design to master plan and structural engineering. So I think we started from the 1970s all the way back to the present. And as I said, part of the core of the practice is that it's not only about architecture, it's really about integrating different disciplines in order to get to an integrated approach in all of our designs in our projects. So this is part of a little bit of our specialist teams. We are part of those specialist teams. So Farah is part of sustainability and environmental design. I'm part of the urban design and landscape. But at the same time, we have people who work on spatial planning, workplace consultancy, from materials research to applied research and development, model shop, interior design, and so on and so forth. So all of these are part of the core of the practice. And on to the next. And at the heart of it is that it's all about collaboration. And collaboration in always centered around the people. And it's really our core basis of the practice. So in the top row, you have very much on what we innovate towards the digital design and all our thinking around how does technology can input into our process. And at the bottom row, it's really the sense of what we call the old school, the analog, the workshops and the exchange of ideas around all of our design. And on that note, in everything what we do, of course, the core of it is how to be in the most sustainable way in our design, in our way of building, and our way of planning. So we pretty much have been covering that over the last 50 years on sustainability in all of our projects. And this is just a glimpse of what we've done so far. Starting from the science-based centers of visual arts, if you haven't been there, this is around the UK. Around internationally, and obviously some of these projects we will touch base on a few of them. But just to give you a glimpse of what we've done in London, I think you all know Trafalgar Square as a regenerative transformation project that is starting since 1996 and it ended up in 2003. This isn't working. So from the before and after that you have, you know what? Let me go there. Let me go. It's easier. Sorry about that. So from the before and after, that was pretty much around, very much driven by cars. It has turned into what you know now today, a space for the people and for the public for different events. And I think this is pretty much on what we always promote as places for people. And in a very quick manner, we've got Crossrail Place, which was, it is in Canary Wharf. I think most of you know this. That what started as a train station, it really evolved around that is going beyond a station itself. It's really putting that something that is also a destination, but something that it brings biophilic design, something to make spaces to dwell in, to be. And that made a catalyst for the rest of the development. But to give something special now, we were involved into the actual rooftop of that project itself. And this is just one of the spaces that we covered back then. And this is obviously the projects that you know at this point. So we're going to give you a little bit of a glance of what regenerative design is on our future projects, and starting with sustainability.
Sure. Thank you very much. So before that, just a little bit of an intro into sustainability technically. So many of you may be aware of some of the material. I'll go through it quite quickly, but just a bit of a refresher for those that don't. So evolution of sustainability and what this means for us. So intuitive design, back when sort of the 1960s, 70s, it was what was intuitive, what meant better design. That's gone forward to more around the 90s, which was quantifiable. We started to see a lot more certifications, understanding of BREEAM, LEED, HQE. These are all rating systems that are used for buildings. And then now you may see the change, which is a lot more holistic. So it's more about wellness in design as well as maybe the more environmental performance. In terms of our projects, what does that mean? So you can see here, as Laura nicely showed you on the 50 years of evolution of sustainability slide, the projects have also gone through that process. So where we were maybe more intuitive, now more quantifiable, and then more holistic now. Wellness is a lot more spoken about in terms of the project credibility. Taking that step further, we also discussed the future of sustainability. So looking at how does that mean for 2030 and 2050, we're seeing a lot more about regenerative design. So you're going to hear us say that quite a lot. It's the main theme that will run through our slides, and this is where now building upon that thought. Just to show you a little bit of intro, so we have also been at each of the COP conferences. So this is where we've been speaking about regenerative design, sustainability targets, frameworks, and how does this impact our projects. What I wanted to show you here is the Sustainable Development Goals. So many of you may be aware, we've all seen it many times. We use this on all of our projects, and the beauty of which, I'm going to go to the next slide because I think this is where it gets a bit more interesting. So we have 10 themes of sustainability, call it whatever you want, 10 themes, 10 topics. And this is where the beauty of which can be applied for any scale of project. Now, it can be for a carpet, a lighting products. It can apply to buildings in terms of their whole performance and how they are performing. Or it can apply to a cities, which is where Laura and I have a lot more experience and have some projects to show you. They are holistic. So I spoke earlier about the kind of the intuitive moving to holistic. They cover all aspects of sustainability, and it's what we use as a gap analysis on all projects to make sure we're covering the right topics. Just to give that a bit of gravitas, here is how they link to all those UN SDG goals. And if you ever seen any of our colleagues in any of the conferences or other talks, we refer to this a lot. So you may, you'll see this around. So what does that mean for regenerative design? Just to give you a bit of a cheat sheet of what we're going to kind of go into a little bit more. Mitigation hierarchy, talking about impact, environmental impact, biodiversity of whether it's a product, manufacturing, whether it's a building or a city, and what does that mean? Nature-based solutions, I'm sure you're all aware. How does the nature come into the design? And then net gain. So how do we then become regenerative is the main takeaway. It can also mean the same thing for materials. So I dropped this in here just to show kind of what it means for material selection. Again, the beauty of which can be for a product, a building, or at city scale in terms of manufacturing and what does that mean across procurement. Local content, something that is referred to a lot, and I'm sure we've all heard lots about. Health and well-being, I've touched on. Raw material optimization, so really understanding the supply chain and that whole cradle to grave, and then product life cycles. The main takeaway being efficiency and consumption, do more with less. Again, the beauty of which can apply to a product, a building, or a city. So that's kind of the big thing to take away. Urban design, maybe I'll pass back.
Yeah. Well, just to give you a hit of that sustainability, as Farah was saying, goes beyond through scales. The scale that I particularly work on is all the space between the buildings. Let's say if this is all London, everything that you see in orange is what we kind of contribute to all the design projects in the practice. And as I mentioned before, at the heart of that is really about the people, how to make this very successful for all generations and for future generations as well. And within that integrated team, obviously, this is not about architects or urban designers. This is about everyone else contributing. So within a very integrated team, to have mobility planners, to have ecologists, to have anthropologists, environmental psychologists, in fact, city planners, etc. All of this contributes to the rest of the collaborative team in the practice. And that gives us a little bit around certain approaches that is very analytical, qualitative research, and obviously design proposals around that. Yeah. And within that, we have had the opportunity to work across different cities, different climates, different cultures at the same time, and therefore different needs. And this is where I think the sustainability goes across all the scales, across any kind of approaches that we do. And the beauty of that is that we can work in different all the scales, from rooftop on a London terrace to whole new cities at the region in South Sava. Pretty much 3 or 4 times the area of the borough of Islington, just to give you a sense of scale. Things are becoming very data driven. I also wish to say AI driven, but mostly data driven. And therefore, we try to combine the two things. One is to really understand places on all its dimensions and how we use data more effectively and how to inform our design. You know this is Borough of Islington, this is Southwark, and how do you understand all these different components, the lessons learned, and therefore how to inform our design process. And within that, there's also the qualitative aspects, the social aspects into it. What are the users' needs? What are they looking for? So if there is on site, there is interviews, and there is that understanding of the culture indeed. And within that in mind is obviously trying to come up with that solution of any kind of project, doesn't matter the scale, and try to come up with that sort of a layer cake of the project, right? What are those elements that we need to combine to make a very active, vibrant city, but most importantly, more sustainable aspects of the project? So it's very much an integrated approach. And within that in mind, that regenerative approach comes into the different scales that we're going to give you. We're going to give you examples of a small, medium, and large scale projects, which are a little bit more up to the present of design proposals. So we're starting with a small scale.
Okay, so we've had kind of the lesson, the more technical side. We've got to the good stuff now. So just to slow down. So to introduce you to Ombu Acciona Ombu is in Madrid. It was a project that the office worked on, a fantastic example of kind of regenerative design. The reason being, this old building here, it used to be supply energy to the neighborhood. It was disused. I think about 1970, Acciona eventually bought it and had used it. It was completely in disrepair, and the idea was, what could we do with it now? They were looking at their assets and trying to understand. So retrofitting the building to the utmost sustainable action. Acciona is an energy company, so from their ethos is understanding sustainability and what does that mean for them in terms of the energy world. And we worked with them to basically retrofit the building. They knew, and we knew, that current building standards are insufficient. So targets such as for the UK, BREEAM Very Gold, we believe tracks to about a 4-degree global warming, i.e. it's not good enough. Paris Agreement, as you all know, is around 2 degrees, 1.5 to 2. The point being that we needed to go beyond current building standards. Just saying BREEAM Outstanding, LEED Platinum was no longer good enough, and embodied carbon had to be spoken about. In terms of embodied carbon, often everyone refers to operational carbon only, the running of the building. And we wanted to make the client aware that embodied carbon was about the making of the building. Now, we were reusing this disused building effectively, banking all of that construction material, embodied energy, and how could we build on that? So hopefully this works. A very nice image here to show all of the calculations that we did in terms of a new building benchmark, what the reuse of that building meant, and therefore what the reuse plus therefore extension that the client required. So it is for Acciona, it's offices now. We reused the building, all of the steelwork and the trusses and the bricks. In the next video, apologies. And there you can see here, just as I was explaining, so the 12 trusses were retained. A huge amount of carbon through the new timber structure that was internal, and I have a couple of photos to show you next, and 10,000 tons of bricks retained and restored to their original condition. Now, shown here is some of the photos from previous to what is up to date, and you can see there a very nice story of regenerative design. What does this mean for a building? You can see the interior here, the timber that I referred to, and the external, and it had a very positive effect on the master plan around the building as well. We saw rental values increased. We saw a lot more people interested in the area, and it became a destination, and people wanted to go there. You can see here the embodied carbon reduction, looking at the glue lamp, demountable. I didn't mention that, but yes, prefabricated and demountable. And a bit more pictures of the public access to the park, so the external around the outside. And here, I just wanted to read this. So net zero historic building refurbishment, yes. But an interesting question is, how did this then contribute to Madrid? What did that mean for the environmental sustainability? Why was it also regenerative? So a few thoughts here just to take away from a couple of those slides. So one I mentioned here, increased value of existing asset, increased rental values, understanding the area around. Reduced hard surfaces, yes. Reduced resource use, reduced climate change, yes. So lots of benefits there, and all about urban regeneration and regenerative design in the case of an old building. What can we do? Okay, second one for you. Maldives. So moving from Madrid now to the Maldives. A very interesting conceptual vision master plan that we worked on very recently. It's called Garfaru. It is an atoll around, you can see here in the Maldives. It's a single resort experience, yes, but is it about a resilient master plan? So the existing master plan, current island, is this small part here, very, 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 very small section. And as you know, or may be aware, local challenges for the Maldives, certain things that we had to be aware of. The biggest one is sea level rise, quite a very important one. Environmental destruction, yes. Loss of habitat, pollution, issues like this. Lack of economic return, yes. Social inequalities, that's a big one. And high dependence on imports. Obviously, the Maldives needs lots of imports. They have energy, water issues. Waste is then also traveled, removed. So for us, we knew that they wanted to expand their island. They wanted to build, if I just go back, apologies. So they wanted to expand the island and expand the existing as well. So in terms of reclamation is not necessarily a sustainable activity, but it was about how can we build this master plan with resilience in mind, knowing that sea level rise is an issue, knowing that the Maldives need to continue developing. So it's a big sustainability question and how to deal with that. So 3 things in terms of the sea level rise specifically here. So resiliency for 100 years. Within 100 years, we were looking at the flood maps. Lots of the Maldives will have inundation issues. Coastal protection, a big one. No surprises there. Formation level. So this is where we really discussed the build up and the level that we were building to and changing and what is current practice. Looking at best practice, how can we make that better? And then environmental protection. So you may remember I had some of the sort of pollution issues and marine issues on the challenges slide. So I just want to stop and show you this. So what did we do? The main takeaway here is these main 5 items at the bottom in terms of regenerative design. What was our framework that we set up? So climate adaptive. We know the climate's changing. No surprises here. How can we design for this in mind? Minimize dredging and reclamation. So we minimized the areas that needed to be reclaimed. We looked at floating structures. So what could be floating that maybe had a shorter lifespan or we knew needed to be changed? For example, infrastructure and utilities. Nurturing the ecology, pretty self-explanatory. Prosperity for all. So how could we include the existing island within it? And they're part of the design. Unifying communities, exactly the same. And then net zero energy, water and waste, the regenerative part. In terms of the coastal protection, just a few examples here of what we did and what we meant by that. So here you have some of the hard edges, stilted, floating structures I spoke about. The idea is there was a hierarchy in terms of what needed to be reclaimed land, what could be floating, and that's kind of the main takeaway. All of it resulted in kind of some examples here and some example pictures of kind of floating islands and the island expansion that I just explained. So a very nice example of kind of the middle scale that we spoke about what does in regenerative design mean in the example of a climate adaptive resilient master plan in the Maldives. Bahrain, your turn.
Thank you. So going from Madrid, the Maldives, now I'm going to take you to the desert a little bit. This is the large scale, let's put it this way, of an example of a project. This is in Bahrain, and this is called Bila Al Jazair Master Plan. It's been recently published, and we were commissioned by the client, a real estate company and a real estate development, to try to create a new city. The typical buzzwords are create a smart and sustainable city. What does that really mean? And of course, there's an entire brief behind it, but most importantly is what Farah just described, is the importance and the light touch, let's say, on how to design a city that was actually a coastal city. How do you deal with a sea level rise, and how do you bring development in a more sensitive way? And how to work around, obviously, with the future resiliency of that place. So at the core of that, there were three main components of the project that really becomes the sustainability aspects of it, but also the resiliency aspects of it. One was, it is about, if we want to regenerate, to think about regenerative design and regenerative master planning, how do we conserve and restore ecosystems to begin with? So I think that was one of the main aspects of the project. The second one is, how can we support the biodiversity? How can we bring that in? And therefore, can we enhance the social and economic vitality? Because in the end of the day, you want a place to live, to work, and also to create a destination at the same time. So it all started with the big ideas, as usual, working with the client, with other collaborators as well, and how to bring to this place experiences. How do you bring experience into a project? But most importantly, how to bring a design that can be sensitive to its environment. And also, very importantly, how to deal with a very harsh climate at the same time. And it all starts, believe it or not, with a little bit of research. How do you understand the culture of the place, the DNA of such aspects of the project? And this is just to give you an overview. It might seem very, very academic, but it is in fact quite important to actually start from the very initial process, try to inform the design of our streets, the design of our public spaces. And this is us really getting into the place of the aspects of the place. That is really about the urban spaces. It's really about dimensions of widths of streets. How do you experience the space that you move around? How do you connect places? This is also in collaboration with the environmental design to say what is the best orientation of streets and spaces, and therefore how does that inform the grid of the city. And within that, then we actually create approaches that are very much based on passive solutions. From what is the felt temperature if you're in a desert, as opposed to central Manama is obviously in Bahrain, in Manama. And these were related to the width of the spaces as well. And as you have the felt temperature, do you actually create arcades that could provide the shading, or do you use the use of green carpets? So all of these aspects were actually design strategies, and therefore, how can you translate that into the solutions of those passive solutions into the design? Do you create something that is more nature-driven within their environment? The use of PVs, for instance, which is a very typically made kinds of proportions of elevations and width and heights of the proportion of the spaces, use of materials, shading, and of course the use of landscape. And as I said before, it's very much a project that is very driven by solar and wind analysis. So that was part of the design process that we had to bring into the project. And these analytical tools or analytical approaches, let's say, it's also trying to give us the best proportions of the plan itself. And having said that, creating experience is also part of that regenerative design approach. Is creating experiences because that is what you see in the everyday. That's it. That is what you enjoy the spaces around the way you move. So just to give you a glimpse of around what we called the beach experience and the different aspects of the project, from the more natural beaches to the ones that are related to more urban aspects of the project. We started off with the beach itself because it is a very well-known beach in Bahrain. So how do you reaffirm the beachfront as one of the main core design drivers? And I'm going to take you through, let's say, a day in the life of that vision. And if we start with the resort, a lot of people ask, you always talk about smart cities and sustainable city, but what does that really mean? And somehow, behind the whole design process, I'm just going to show you what that means in terms of all the metrics and how just we put that into a vision of the visuals, let's say. But the whole work behind it has a lot of meaning to it. So we start with the ideas, naturally, of what kind of materiality, what kind of visuals, what kind of sense of views, for example, to take best places and for what. And obviously, this is a part of the resort of that beach experience, to say, well, you can have higher recycled content materials, you can have more cooling effects of the surfaces, and what kind of materials do you use, the type of planting as well. Do you actually make those streets more walkable and fully pedestrianized or not, etc.? And those were the kind of metrics. If you go around towards the more beachfront or the beach experience, then you would have something that are a little bit more with elements of smart infrastructure to have social links, elements of how much of the pollution is counted, for instance, alongside with the different kinds of activities that were part of the program. If you go to the main boulevard, which is the more urban side of the element of the project, by your, noon that you're going to have towards your lunch, it's all about how you move around the city. What sort of elements can we try to input for future mobility? The client wanted to think something that was very future thinking. They wanted, yes, electric vehicles. They were pushing very much for electric vehicles, but most importantly for more collective vehicles, autonomous vehicles that will get rid more of the private vehicles and have more public transport, which in Bahrain is quite, it's uncommon. And therefore, what would be the smart infrastructure within that environment, whether you have certain destinations or charging pods. Those of us, it's already exist here in London, in fact, but in Bahrain it's quite new to them. And the living and experience is all about well-being. They really wanted to encourage the well-being of living and at the same time preserve the local life. And how do you do that within a new design? So if you're living in your apartment by your 2 p.m., which is quite your most intense, sunlight of the day, do you have spaces with shade? Do you have the timings of the shade and the temperature and the felt of humidity? We're talking about a climate that is very humid as well. Sometimes the air quality, or having a vision of CO2 emissions that can be avoided, etc., within the elements of building that sort of smart building component into the apartments, or other typologies that are more for the villas, that is more low rise, and therefore having the element of biophilia design embedded into it. The use of water and how we can actually count that within the system of the development as well. And again, part of the design of the villas is within the architecture and the very traditional architecture of Bahrain. And therefore, how do you create destinations, very recognizable spaces in the project. Now, the client wanted to have some sort of a unique destination, and they were very pushing towards a surf park or recreate a surfing park. So that's the surfing park amongst a kind of like a main avenue. The main point of reference was actually Las Ramblas in Barcelona. But they wanted something that would recreate a pedestrianized environment with a destination. But within that, the aspect of the landscape came into place very, very importantly. They call this at the green spine. And again, what were the elements of native local plants in order to try to bring that solution into the project, but at the same time having the lower cost of development as well. Within the development of the project and the phasing of the project. Aspects of a beach club and aquarium were part of the destinations as well. And again, elements of the rooftops and solar shades were part of embedded into it. And finally, how do you move around? Having, yes, a sustainable transport, but can you power that with more newer technologies or advanced technologies that are coming into place now in the future? And most of that we say, well, you can reduce a little bit on the mobility side, but then having more pedestrianized routes that takes you to your main local destination that were very important to them. One of them was the souk. And even within souks is trying to create that elements of shades and air quality, felt temperatures at the same time, which were not the typical to recreate the arcades, but something different. And on a more, let's say, aspect of the street is the beach boulevard. And again, this is all part of the experience on how do you live your sort of the reference of your Miami Beach kind of a way, but more localized in Bahrain. So I think what would be, the overall aspects of the projects to be, yes, intelligent, what sort of technologies you can embed it into it, but most importantly, how can you build that resiliency for the future? Because this is in concept master plan. And from vision to concept and to the development phase, we need to make sure that resiliency and that sustainable aspects of the projects are from the get-go, so from the starting point. And as we mentioned before, is putting those sort of layers of the project that we do. And at the heart of it is the main purposes was about minimizing the environmental impact. It is about lowering the low carbon infrastructure and how you can build that up with certain ways, and creating those resilient systems within each of your energy and waste and water infrastructure, your mobility infrastructure, and how do you create all these elements across the different networks, so let's say the different kinds of infrastructure that the city needs. And within that in mind, it really creates a very holistic approach to regenerative design. And I think regenerative design really means that goes beyond sustainability, actually. It's really about creating systems that can give you a sense of what is the best living for people, but also planet at the same time. So we're not just building for one entire place. And some food for thoughts that we thought it was important, and I know we went through different scales, is that regenerative design is also the importance of context. Doesn't matter the scale. And the importance of context is that in the past, Farah showed a very nice image of embodied carbon and carbon emission and operational. Yes. And but I think within that in mind, we always need to think about context. So 2 different projects that we have. One of them is a very high-rise tower that really implies very high embodied carbon with low operational carbon. Okay, so you really need a very high to make the building run, but operationally it implies a lower demand. If you talk about building a little bit of like a mini piece of a district, piece of city, then it's a lower embodied carbon, but a higher operational carbon. What this means is the context actually plays quite an important role, because it takes you longer to do actually this within an operational carbon, higher carbon emissions as well, but the embodied or the running of the building is lower as opposed to this. So I think there has to be a balancing act in how we build, where we build it, and the ways to build as well, when it comes to the important to the net zero energy and to those aspects in cities. So that's why we think in the importance of context. And the reason for that, I'll end with this image, because this is usually everybody that talks about the future. Electric vehicles, electric pods, autonomous vehicles, walkability, having activities, active frontages, less shade, greenery, green infrastructure, balconies, views, and so on and so forth. And we leave you with this thought, is that the future of regenerative design for cities, again, it moves beyond something that is sustainable. It's really about transforming from your building to all cities. It's really a living system, I think. And how can you contribute in the most positive way? And sometimes the smaller steps have bigger impact. And at the same time, is not just for a place, it's for everyone. And I think that's becoming even more and more important as we move on. And at the heart of it is for people and our well-being. So thank you very much for that.